Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor fans? Welcome to Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Tuesday, November 12th, and today, Grayson and I will be diving into Baylor's next football opponent, the West Virginia Mountaineers. They're now 5-4 on the season after back-to-back victories over Arizona and Cincinnati. They defeated Arizona 31-26 a few weeks ago, and on Saturday took down rival Cincinnati 31-24. So they're bouncing back after all the speculations leading back to Neil Brown. Is he back on the hot seat, et cetera? Now they've won 2 games in a row. Both of those games were on the road, and they're now 5-4 overall. 5-4 overall. Baylor's also 5-4 overall, 3-3 in Big 12 play. So a big matchup, kind of for bowl eligibility here. And both teams have a challenge to end the season. So getting this one out of the way for both teams is important. A few updates before I'm going to have Grayson kind of discuss a few items from Dave Aranda's press conference. But Neil Brown mentioned in his press conference that Aiden Garnes, a starting cornerback, last played against Iowa State, is out. Probably not going to be back for this game, and really sounds like for the entire season. Safety Aubrey Burks, last played against Iowa State as well. Both of those guys, 2 starters in their secondary, got hurt against Iowa State. He's not expected back either. Wide receiver Hudson Clement, their second leading receiver, 383 yards and 3 touchdowns, possibly going to play, but just started running as of Monday. So there's some question marks there. Then quarterback Garrett Green, kind of the big storyline there, if he's going to come back for this game against Baylor, is finally going through 11-on-11 as of Monday. He hasn't done that in a while. He hasn't even practiced since their game against Kansas State several weeks ago. And obviously they're pretty banged up. And I knew that they struggled in the secondary in terms of production, ability to stop people, but those 2 secondary injuries still loom large in this game against Baylor. Then on the Baylor side of things, Dom Richardson's no longer with the program. The senior running back who transferred in from Oklahoma State last year was interesting update from Dave Aranda on Monday, basically saying, hey, he wanted to play more. His role behind Bryson Washington and Dawson Pendergrass and even Richard Reese had just fallen apart after becoming injured. And that was probably the most interesting nugget from the press conference. But Grayson, I know that you had updates earlier on Sikkim 365. Anything that really stood out to you about what Dave Aranda said on Monday?
I mean, they're game planning for both quarterbacks. You mentioned Garrett Green. Nico Markschul is their other quarterback. I think going into this, I think they're probably going to play Nico. I think that's my guess, my assumption here. Now, Garrett Green is going through 11-on-11 for the first time today. So he's going to go through that and see how it goes. But he's been doing mainly just 7-on-7. So it feels like it's either going to be this week or next week for him to come back unless he suffers a setback. So it could be this week. And the other guy who's out for West Virginia is Jaden Bray, another wide receiver who transferred in from Oklahoma State. So that's another kind of big loss for them. But Dave Aranda just mentioned got a game plan for both. And they mentioned with Nico in their lineup, they're more of a pocket passing team. They like to set the pocket, allow him to stand clean in the pocket and make throws down the field. Whereas with Garrett Green, they'll move the pocket a little bit. And then obviously they're going to run him quite a bit because Garrett Green's a really good athlete. So that was kind of one of the bigger notes that I saw. I think some of the other stuff was more just, Sawyer Robertson is 100%. He left the game after the TCU game with a boot on his foot, and he's good now. So 100% there is what Dave Aranda said. And he also said this is the healthiest they've been all season. So that's great news. None of the guys that he mentioned have been contributors. So I'm curious if maybe they get some guys back like Kendrick Simpkins. We'll see Jaquez Evans. He's only played in 3 games. So we'll see kind of, what the strategy is there. But yeah, so it seems like Baylor's pretty healthy. Outside of that, I mean, he pretty much just talked about the respect he has for Neil Brown, how this is going to be a scary environment, a tough environment, I think, and a place that Baylor hasn't had a lot of success at. Talked about how Neil Brown gets his guys ready, and then also mentioned, they're still playing for something. And I think, we kind of all forget about this just based on the record and how fans perceive their program. But unlike Baylor, who's 3-3 in Big 12 play, West Virginia is actually 4-2. They lost to Penn State and Pittsburgh in the non-conference. So they're 4-2 right now in Big 12 play. And I mean, the rest of their schedule is easy. I mean, so not easy, but very winnable, very manageable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so if they went out, I mean, there's still an outside shot that they find themselves in the Big 12 championship. So they're playing for a lot. They're playing hungry. And I think Dave Aranda definitely recognizes that from this West Virginia program and kind of realizes they're going to get a really good effort from West Virginia on Saturday.
Yeah, so if they finish 7-2, I mean, they're in a great position because you expect someone to slip up. We've seen it the last few weeks of the top echelon teams in the Big 12 losing. Obviously, a couple of weeks ago, Kansas State and Iowa State go down. Then once again, Iowa State goes down this past weekend. So if they could win out, I mean, absolutely, they're right in the mix for it. You mentioned the Garrett Green and game planning for both quarterbacks. You got to remember Garrett Green last year against Baylor, 16 of 25 passing, 269 yards, 2 touchdowns. Passing, then on the ground, 14 carries, 103 yards, 2 touchdowns. So and that was a game Baylor honestly should have won there at the end, but he made a huge play at the end of the game to win that for him. And that's just going into this season. Everyone expected a big year from him. He struggled, I mean, relatively speaking, a lot of interceptions compared to what he wants to do, but he's still such a threat on the ground that him not being in this game changes the dynamic of that offense. And honestly, I don't know what other team would even be comparable in terms of running the football that Baylor's face. Garrett Green in the lineup with West Virginia, that's, in my mind, the best rushing team that Baylor's faced this year. Texas Tech, you would think with Taj Brooks would be that. The ability from the quarterback position, we see it this year with Sawyer Robertson, his ability to make plays on the ground, how much it opens up. Garrett Green's another animal. I mean, he can take it for 75 at any point. Wherever they are on the field, he can score, and he just has a really, really good speed from the quarterback position. So that's my question, is if he does play, if it has been concussions that everyone's speculating about, what's the risk factor that he has in terms of running the football? Is he going to be willing to go and take hits down the field, or is he going to be more protective of himself? So if you have that and they're making the decision on who's going to play, if he's not able to run or not willing to run like he would be before because of potential concussions, is it worth playing him? I say potentially, but I also understand why you'd say like his biggest asset is his legs and his ability to open up offense, and he's not willing to take hits, then maybe that limits their offense if he does play.
It does, but you know, his ability and knack for big plays is something that you can't really replicate. And he does a lot of it out. He can do it outside of the pocket. His problem, honestly, that I've seen consistently in his game is he just can't convert the layups. Like he really struggles at making the easy throws and the throws that, you know, should be easy completions. And then he'll turn around and throw a 50-yard touchdown. And you're just like, okay, you know, if he could get the in-between stuff, you know, he'd be really, really good. But you are right. I mean, if he's limited at all running the football, it definitely sets them back. But I just think he's a better quarterback than Nico. That's just kind of my mindset on it, even without, you know, even if his legs aren't 100%. I like him as a player. Now, he has struggled at times this year, and he's not the most accurate quarterback, but he'll hit you with the big plays. And I think he also just gives them another level of confidence in the position. But, you know, Nico's done a nice job, and, you know, they've won games. And so I can't necessarily say that, you know, they don't have that with Nico. I just think there is another level to it when Garrett Green plays. And yes, I do agree with you, though. You mentioned the run game. I do think this is probably the best running football team that Baylor has played this year when they have Garrett Green. When they don't have Garrett Green, I think they kind of look more similar to the other teams Baylor's played. Whether you look at Texas Tech or, you know, Iowa State, who, you know, obviously had their way with Baylor. But I think they're more in line with that as opposed to what they are when they have Garrett Green, which is more like a, you know, top third run offense in the Big 12.
Yeah, it does. I mean, and it all goes back to his legs, obviously, and I think they have talent there at the running back position. So let's stick with the offense. Carry on to this. I was going to start with defense, but let's start with offense and what West Virginia presents. And it's a run first offense. That's what it predicates on. They want to take play action shots, deep shots. Garrett Green's not the most accurate passer at 55% roughly for the season against Power 5 competition. But they're going to take the top off the defense. And I think the way teams have truly played them is just saying, hey, we're going to take away the run. And then if you beat us over the top, because of Garrett Green's inconsistencies throwing the football. If you beat us over the top, well, then more power to you, but we're not going to let the run game beat us. And if you look back to, for instance, the Oklahoma State game, that was their best rushing game, which everybody can say that. But most of the time, teams are limiting what they do rushing the football, but it takes so much attention away from the passing game that they're able to connect on shots. And so the fact that Hudson Clement potentially out again, you mentioned Jordan Bray being potentially out again, they're going to be limited if those guys can't go, obviously throw in Garrett Green there. So I think Baylor's defensive game plan is going to be just shut down the run as much as you can. Dave Aranda mentioned some adjustments, whereas TCU, they were just saying, hey, we're going to commit to stopping the pass. We're going to let it go against the run a little bit more. And we don't feel like you can beat us there. In this game, absolutely not. It's going to be stop the run first, force everything else deep. And if you can connect, then more power to you. But this offense, man, it's dangerous because they have explosive. Jaheim White as a running back, you saw Baylor fans remember him from last year. He got the edge several times, and I have to imagine that's going to be an emphasis this week is don't let these guys get to the edge. Dirty up in the middle. If they get to the edge, and that includes Garrett Green if he plays, but Jaheim White, if he gets to the edge, he has the speed to take it to the house. I would say a upper half Big 12 running back. He's not the best in the league, but he has that home running ability. He reminds me of Jalen Jackson from Iowa State quite a bit. And we know what Iowa State did running the football against Baylor. So I'm really, really anxious to see out of the bye week what Dave Aranda does schematically to limit West Virginia's run game. And if you can make them one-dimensional throwing the football, and you're in a really good spot.
I think when I looked at this last game against Cincinnati, Cincinnati's got a bottom 4 run defense in the Big 12. And so I was kind of expecting West Virginia to be able to run the football, and they only ran for 92 yards in that game. And it's really weird too, because they were up pretty much the whole game. So it was kind of a running game script, and they were unable to run the football. And, I think a part of that is having Nico as your quarterback. It limits you in a multitude of ways. You mentioned, CJ Donaldson. I don't know what he's dealing with, but they're not getting him the ball very much anymore at all. It's pretty much just Jaheim White right now. And Jaheim's really good. I mean, he made Baylor pay last year. He torched Baylor last year. And so I think coming into this game, it's going to be very important for Baylor to stop the run. I think they're going to make that a priority, kind of like they've done a couple times, over the course of this winning streak. Against Oklahoma State, stop the run. Against Tech, stop the run. TCU was a little bit different. They're kind of the wild card in the mix here because they just throw it so much. But I think in this matchup, that's what they're going to try to do. Stop the run, stop Jaheim White, force Nico to make a bunch of throws from the pocket, and don't allow him to create explosives over the top. It's going to be I think the whole chess match is going to be, how do you limit explosive plays and force them to play efficient football and get first down after first down? I think that's what Baylor's going to try to force them to do. And honestly, that recipe has worked during this 3-game win streak most of the time. TCU game, not so much, but for the most part, it definitely has worked. And I think it's going to be a similar game plan in Morgantown. And to be honest, I think you look through what West Virginia has done this year, and at times they've been impressive offensively, but then at other times they've just kind of no-showed. And so that's the issue, right? Is, how consistent are they really on the offensive side? I have a lot of concerns about that, especially if they don't have Garrett Green at quarterback.
Yeah, you mentioned the run game against Cincinnati. 28 attempts in that game was the least amount for the season. And the next least amount was 32 against Albany and 32 against Iowa State. And obviously they beat Albany, lost to Iowa State. And so it probably does have something to do with not having Garrett Green in there. I know that Cincinnati has 2 really big interior defensive linemen that I don't know if they were struggling with. They didn't like the matchup there, but probably had a lot to do with Garrett Green not playing in that game. Probably have more carries, but 3.29 yards per attempt in that game against Cincinnati with 1 touchdown. I think that you talked about Jaheim White, the 133 yards last year. If they can just, you want it, like, if you can't give up explosive plays on the ground like that, that's a backbreaker. And we've seen it, Baylor, be the opposite of that the last 3 weeks. Every single game, starting back with the Tech game early, and then obviously Oklahoma State over and over, Dawson Pendergrass, and then last week against TCU offensively, those are backbreakers where you feel like you have guys in position to make tackles, and then the running back breaks for 50 yards. Baylor can't allow that to happen on the road. And that's what West Virginia is going to try to do. If even if Garrett Green's back throwing the football, but their bread and butter is running the football. in this game, and then they're going to take shots over the top. So I'm really, man, like if they can slow down the run game at all, make them convert first downs, you have to feel good about this matchup, at least from a defense side of the ball. And that's mainly not because of what West Virginia does throwing the football. That's because you're scared about what they could do potentially throwing the football. For me, Baylor's secondary against TCU is not their strong suit. They got exposed there. Obviously got exposed against Oklahoma State. And even dating back. Oh, at Texas Tech, I didn't really feel like expose them, but Texas Tech doesn't take a ton of shots downfield. West Virginia is going to take shots downfield. And I'm really anxious to see what Dave Aranda does in the secondary if he does commit to stopping the run up front with 7 guys. Or, if you can do it with 6, great, but I imagine he's going to have as many guys in the box as he can and feel comfortable in the secondary.
Yeah, you're going to have to feel comfortable in the secondary. I mean, you're missing that many key players for them when you look at Bray and Clement. I mean, that's big to not have those 2 guys. Now, their weapons are still there. Cole Taylor, really good tight end. He gave Baylor some problems last year in their matchup as well. He's a good tight end, and Baylor has struggled with tight ends, pretty consistently over the last couple years. So I think they're going to get attacked there. I expect West Virginia to do what they can to get him involved. And then kind of their big play threat right now, their only big play threat, to be honest, is Traylon Ray, their outside receiver, and they're going to take shots to him. And, whoever's playing corner, whether it's Caden Jenkins or Lorando Johnson or one of the other guys off the bench, Reggie Bush or LeVar Thornton, they're going to have to be ready, in coverage for those deep shots, because they will take those deep shots. And I think for the most part, Traylon Ray is the guy that they're going to try to target on those deep shots. But outside of that, just not a lot of weapons and not a lot of guys that have done a lot. And so when you lose Bray and you lose Clement, now you're down to like 2 guys that you really have to focus on, makes things really difficult for an offense, to kind of operate at its full capacity, especially if Baylor can take away the run game. So yeah, you're exactly right. I think that's going to be a very interesting combination there. And just kind of mentioning the running game, Donaldson has 465 yards and 6 touchdowns. White has 572 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then here's the difference at quarterback. Garrett Green, 471 yards, 3 touchdowns. Nico Marchiol, 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. So very different running styles. Yes, Marchiol has scored a little bit in the red zone and short runs for touchdowns, but Green gives you some explosiveness with his 6 yards per carry.
Yeah. And so overall, West Virginia's rushing offense explosive play rate. So basically 10-yard plus, they rank 7th in the Big 12. Passing wise, this is the difference. They don't throw it a ton, but they're 4th in explosive play rate throwing the football. So they want to lure you in, get your safeties down in the middle of the box, get them down into the box and take shots over the top. So one area that Baylor struggled secondary wise, safeties, their ability to read, run, pass, right? What's going on with the front, and then being in position to make plays whenever they're throwing downfield. Now, is this a game, like you mentioned, like, are you just more worried about your corners being in position to have, you don't want to get pass interference, obviously, but to be in contention to knock down a pass? There's no one that really scares me in West Virginia in there at the receiver position, like you would say, for instance, Iowa State, TCU, Texas Tech to an extent. I think that you take that risk. I think that you say, hey, let our cornerbacks just see if they can hold up, and let our safeties to a great extent commit to the run, especially the star position. You're not going to have to dedicate a ton in terms of being able to cover a tight end. I think your linebackers can do a decent job there. So if you can put that star against the run a little bit more, and then the secondary wise, just say, hey, Lorando, Caden, whoever's out there, just match up as best as you can, and let's see if they can convert these passes. It's scary. I mean, there's a lot to be scared about there. But I think if you put them in situations to play man coverage and make whoever's playing quarterback beat you in those one-on-one shots, it's not their strong suit, but they have the ability to do it.
See, I'm kind of, I guess, in the opposite camp. I'm kind of in the camp of I think Baylor needs to play safeties over the top and force just short throws and just like force them to be accurate and complete passes and put more guys closer to line of scrimmage, but also, and you're planning on stopping the run with your 7 guys, but then having 4 guys back in the secondary in coverage and in help as well. And I think that's the way to play this, honestly. I think that you need to make sure that you're not just giving up 50-yard touchdowns because a cornerback fell in one-on-one coverage, or you know what I mean? Like, I think it's, to me, in this type of matchup against this West Virginia team, I think it's more advantageous to force them to have 10 play drives than giving them opportunities where it's just like, all right, we just have to beat one man to create an explosive. That's just kind of how I view their offensive construction, and why I would just say, I would be a little bit more probably cautious. And I think Dave Aranda has been cautious for the most part all year long. Even in the the TCU game, he was doing everything he could to drop a bunch of guys into coverage. It just didn't quite work out. Their zone schemes just didn't quite work. But I think in this matchup against a very different receiving core and a very different quarterback, I think there will be more opportunities for success.
Yeah, I think my concern is that if you feel like your safeties are going to struggle in coverage at all, would you rather than be in position to help with the run? And so that's where my give and take is like, that West Virginia wants to run the ball, so make them execute something that they're not as strong suit at. But I get what you're saying. I think that if you say, hey, we're going to make you execute all the way down the field, the trade-off is if those running backs get to the second level at all, where are your safeties? Are they deep? Are you able to limit the yards per carry? It's just a chess match at this point, because I think Dave Aranda is going into this with the off week behind him that says he has to be comfortable with this plan, and you hope that he has the best plan available to use against West Virginia. Now, not knowing who's playing quarterback changes that a little bit, but I think you go into the game and say, hey, we're planning as if Garrett Green is playing this football game, because I don't think there's a big enough difference between Green and Martial to say, there is a big enough there's not a big enough difference throwing the football between the two that you would really have the game plan differently, other than Garrett Green can really run the football. So if he's playing, then you have to figure out that game plan has to be implemented before they ever take the field.
You have to have another guy in the box. Like Aranda mentioned today, like this was their dilemma against TCU when they went to Wildcat. It becomes a numbers game, and you got to be able to figure out how to even the math, right? And so with Green in the game, that's where you might see more guys having to be in the box, and you having to kind of game plan for it in that way. With Nico, you're not going to have that dilemma at all. Like if he's, he's not going to tuck it very often, and you're going to be able to get pressure on him. And he's not very fast. He's not going to make you pay in that regard, like Green will. And Green made Baylor pay last year, basically the entire game.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift to the other side of the ball for Baylor offensively. And I know we spent a lot of time on defense, but I think that's where this game, if you can limit their ability to run the football and execute drives, I think offensively, Baylor's in a really good position to have success again. Now, you could get on the road and things go haywire like they potentially could, but West Virginia has struggled specifically against the pass. I don't know what they will come. I know Neil Brown loves the idea of playing guys close to the line of scrimmage, stopping the run. So that makes me wonder what he does in this game, because Baylor will present challenges of the ability to say, hey, we can go 5 wide right now if we really want to. What are you going to do if we do that? And that's with the flexibility of Michael Trigg and your running backs to catch passes out of the backfield as well. So offensively, West Virginia is, defensively, West Virginia really struggles in 3 different areas, and that's third down conversions, fourth down conversions, and red zone conversions, touchdown conversions. And then, you can talk about passing efficiency, yards per pass, but those 3 areas are really intriguing to me, because I don't know how they can come into a game like this and be willing to just be okay with just taking away the run, because Sawyer Robertson and the ability for the receivers to make plays are there. And especially with their screen game really improving the last couple of weeks. And that's what I think sets apart Baylor's offense right now, is that those screens that early in the season were going for like 2 yards or a loss of yard now are getting 10 or 11 yards. And a lot of it has to do with the run game. And if West Virginia is going to crowd the box and say, hey, we're not going to let Bryson Washington beat us, that screen game could be the difference. We've seen those short hitch passes, the screens, everything be effective. And I think Sawyer Robertson has that ability to execute that. He doesn't have the strongest arm to the sidelines, but he gets it there quick enough, and the receivers have done a good enough job blocking. And it's just going to open up everything once again for the run game, but also the deep shots.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'm kind of looking at here, West Virginia's got the worst pass defense in the Big 12. And I don't necessarily think it's all that close, especially from an efficiency standpoint. If you look at total yards, I think they're second to last, only ahead of Texas Tech. But efficiency-wise, it's just like every third down is basically a first down. I think they're giving up like 45% of opponent third downs turn into first downs. Something outrageous like that.
Well,
I think it's pretty close to that.
It's in power or against conference play only. They're giving up 49%. And then you talk about, and that's 16th, but then it's on fourth downs, the times that they're not getting an offense is not getting the third down conversion, they're giving up 80% on fourth downs in Big 12 play. So you're 16th and last. So it's kind of like your odds are, regardless of where you're on the field, it's pretty good. If it's anywhere from like 4th and 4 and shorter, you have a pretty good chance of getting it.
Right. And that's going to, I think, be one of those things that Jake Spavital is going to keep a close eye on. I think anytime they're in 4th and 2 or shorter and they're around the their own 40-yard line, they might be going for it. Just because, I think you can put so much pressure on an opponent, especially on the road, that you can really, if you can start scoring points and move the ball effectively for long stretches, you can really kind of set their confidence back. And I think, this past week against Cincinnati, West Virginia's defense played well, but only because they forced turnovers and they got sacks. Those were the 2 areas that they really played well at. They created havoc. They were able to create the turnovers and make plays, but in general, they were not very good. Like, they still were the same defense. They were giving up a lot of yards. Cincy just didn't capitalize. And, my main takeaway, just kind of going through, just watching West Virginia this year and just going through kind of some of their games that they've played, I think their run defense is a little overrated. I was
about to go there as well. I'm in agreement with you.
I don't think it's that good. I mean, so this Cincinnati game is going to be a little bit of an outlier to an extent. They gave up 157 yards rushing, but let's be clear, there was 28 yards that they lost because of sacks. So they really gave up 185 yards rushing to Cincinnati, who's an okay rushing offense, but I don't think they're the level that Baylor is currently at. They outperformed Baylor early in the season, but Baylor is clearly the better rushing offense, I think, at this point. Cincy has really done their damage in the passing game, and that showed up a little bit. West Virginia gave up 222 yards to Penn State, 247 yards to Kansas. And then I think people will point to that Kansas State game, and I just think that Kansas State game is beyond fluky. I mean, Kansas State was putting up any amount of points they wanted to in that game. They scored 45 points and won the game by 27 points, but people are going to look at, but they only gave up 114 yards rushing. Yeah, but Kansas State ran for nearly 4.5 yards per carry. They were doing whatever they wanted in that game.
How many yards did they throw for in that game?
It was like 298, I think, but it was, yeah.
And that's what I go back to. And I'm with you. I fully agree that I think it's overrated to an extent, but West Virginia wants to play close to the line of scrimmage. They want to be physical up there. So they're almost just saying, hey, if you can throw it, then you can beat us. In Kansas State, for instance, they said, hey, well, we're not going to just beat our head against the wall. Let's throw the football. And they threw the football and had success and won by 27 points.
Right. And I mean, still 4.5 yards per carry. I mean, if Baylor's getting 4.5 yards per carry, they're winning this football game. So I think it's just one of those things. It's really hard to win when you're giving up that kind of production on the ground. So I just think in general, they faced some very mediocre rushing offenses. And when they faced even just offenses that are close to Baylor's running the football at this moment, they really have kind of gotten hit, on the ground. And so I think that's the problem for West Virginia is what do you decide to take away here? Because your pass defense has been terrible all year long. You've hemorrhaged yards pretty much all season in that regard. And then when teams have been able to run the football, they've been able to run it pretty successfully. And so I think that's going to be the thing that I'm looking at, because if they put too many guys in the box, Baylor's going to attack their secondary time and time again. If they drop too many guys in coverage, Baylor's just going to run the football like they have the last 3 weeks. And I think that's going to make Baylor really, really tough to solve for this West Virginia defense with all the weapons that they have.
Yeah. And it's really, really interesting because you're talking about 3.68 yards per carry against Big 12 opponents this year. That's second in the Big 12. The only other statistical number for West Virginia's defense that's close to that is fumbles recovered. They're ranked third, and that's fourth. Then you start getting the 7 and below range. There's nothing above that. Explosive play rushing, 9th. Explosive play passing defense, 12th. We talked about red zone, third down, fourth downs. Interceptions, 13th. First down, 7th. Scoring defense, 10th. And what they do, and it's a lot because of what their offense did early in the season running the football, and they shorten games. So there's overall numbers statistically look okay. But then you look into it and it's like, well, the opponent just doesn't have as many opportunities, but they're still being efficient throwing and obviously running the football. But the 3.68 yards per carry is so it is deceiving, right? Like, it's just like,
Yeah.
well, who's doing and what's leading to that? And then you see, okay, it's kind of like, okay, Baylor faces TCU and Colorado, so their rushing numbers look really good right now, right? So they've played those, and it does kind of skew what's happening in that number. And that's a cause for concern for Baylor's defense in there, is saying, hey, what do they really face rushing the football? I still feel confident in them, but is that number true? Are they really the fourth best rush defense in the league? Well, we don't necessarily know. We got to play some better rushing offenses to really know what those numbers look like. But I think Baylor, where the difference between Baylor is that Baylor's in every moment where they face teams that don't run the ball very well, outside of Iowa State, which was just a conundrum of multiple levels of that game, was just so frustrating in general. But they've done a pretty good job against the teams they should stop the run against of stopping the run. I don't think you can say that about West Virginia.
I agree. And then I guess, you mentioned a couple areas where they've had success. I do want to mention they are pretty good at sacks. They're a top 50 team in the nation in sacks. And then they're also, I think, top 70 in tackles for loss. So you're kind of seeing a team that does want to create havoc. Those numbers aren't necessarily great, but it's better than the three teams they faced these previous 3 weeks as far as combined both of them. TCU is better at getting sacks, terrible at tackles for loss. Tech bad at both. Oklahoma State just a little bit worse at both. So West Virginia does pose a problem there. They got after Brendan Sorsby, obviously led to some huge plays for them, including the fumble return for a touchdown. So that's an area that could be concerning, especially on the road. You go on the road and you start having these negative plays that can really set you behind the chains, and then obviously make things tougher on your quarterback and your run game. So that is one area that I did want to mention. I think the other thing that just for this offense is so important, I usually think that defense travels. I feel pretty strongly about that. Like, if you know who you are defensively, it shouldn't really matter where you're playing. But offensively, it does matter. And I think it's huge for Baylor that they've had all these challenges so far this year on the road. When you look at going to Utah, going to Colorado, going to Texas Tech, going to Ames, like, they've had 4 really, really tough experiences on the road. And I think that's going to set them up really well to, kind of be able to maybe go into this game with, all the Baylor fans thinking, wow, they've never won there before. And maybe that mindset is just, oh, this is just another game for Baylor. I don't think that Morgantown is going to, drive them crazy or make them frantic or anything along those lines. And frankly, Morgantown this year has not been that great. They're 2-3 at home, with one of their wins being against Albany. So they haven't really put together a great, performance in front of their home fans this year as a whole.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the Colorado game specifically, and you look back to that game and now what Colorado has done for the rest of the season, and you're sick about that, but you also say, hey, Baylor offensively, and that was Sawyer Robertson's first. I mean, he started against Air Force, but first true road start, first in my mind real start Big 12 play this season. Obviously, he actually started against West Virginia last year at the end of the season, but it was that particular game, atmosphere-wise, they still weren't running the ball. That one's probably the most impressive offensive performance for me based on what we know about Colorado now. And I would say that Colorado defense, and I'm talking about on the road, not at home. I'm talking about on the road specifically. Well, actually, no.
Texas Tech was pretty.
Texas Tech was. But I think that the game against West Virginia, I mean, the one against Colorado was an indicator of what was to come. They still ran they ran for 160 yards in that game. Some of that was Sawyer, but we've also realized, okay, Colorado is a pretty good rush defense. They're not great, but they're pretty good. They can do what they need to do. They're not terrible. And that kind of set the precedent for me of like what this offense could be looking back. I don't think we realized it at the time, but now it's like, okay, that makes that performance looks a lot better. 31 points is still the most points Colorado has given up the entire season. And Baylor didn't score in overtime. And it could have been more than. You talk about the missed field goal at the end. You talk about the drop to Ashton Hawkins. All that's to say is
fumble
the
by
fumble.
Dom Richardson.
Yeah. I mean, that's 38 points there if you get that one. But yeah, so Baylor has performed on the road offensively at every stop. Even the Iowa State game, they were very efficient early. They gave Iowa State headaches and honestly kind of exposed them to an extent. And I always say Iowa State kind of fallen off a cliff defensively in all the games they've played. Baylor kind of exposed that early on. The issue was Baylor didn't have a run game at that juncture. Like, they could not run the football at all, which is remarkable to think how much they've flipped that since then. So you go now for a road game with confidence that you can run the football. Even against the Tech, even in the Tech game, you didn't really have a confidence from a fan standpoint that they're going to go in and run the football. That's when the running game birthed. Like that's when it happened. And now you're going into a game and say, hey, we can run the football. Let's see what West Virginia decides to do. Are they going to take that away completely and let us pass, or vice versa? How is West Virginia going to handle this? Because I don't think Neil Brown's looking at this game with the new defensive coordinator and saying, we're going to have to take away something. So what do they choose to take away?
Right. And we've mentioned this, when Baylor plays defenses that are outside the top 50 in FEI, they torch them. And that is exactly what I'm expecting against West Virginia. And it's not a slight against West Virginia. It's just kind of who Baylor is at this point in the season. And the fact of the matter is their first 4 games against Big 12 opponents were against really good Big 12 opponents and really good defenses specifically. Yeah. And so Baylor's rebounded since then. And, their only bad performance offensively on the road this year was against Utah, and that was without Sawyer Robertson at quarterback. So I think there's just a lot when you kind of look into this and just kind of think to yourself, well, they've been challenged on the road. Their quarterback has figured it out. Their run game has figured it out. They're getting healthier. They're coming off of a bye week. Nothing that I saw from West Virginia really, frankly, made me just kind of go, whoa, that's something new, or that's something I didn't expect. I just felt like that was more of Cincinnati beating themselves. And I sent you a text message this morning. Parker Fleming came out with his, how bad did we get beat graphic this week. And I mentioned, I thought they were going to be near the bottom yesterday. Like they had to be, like they were getting, ran up and down the field against Cincinnati. And lo and behold, it was, I guess, what would you call it? The least impressive win of the entire week was West Virginia's win over Cincy, as Cincy's net success rate was way higher than West Virginia's, but West Virginia found a way to win.
Yeah. I mean, that's 3 turnovers that resulted in 17 points. I mean, take away 2 of those and Cincinnati likely wins. Take away the last one that resulted directly. Yeah, just take away the last one. Cincinnati's probably going to drive. And that's what was so frustrating about that performance from Sorsby, is that he hadn't really had those issues all season. And you watch this game, and he had 3 really rough plays where he turned the football over, and they all resulted in points. One of the interception was, I know it's a 4th down play, and you want to get rid of the football. You want to give your guys a chance, but not in the way that he did. I mean, he just threw a lollipop up, and it was an easy pick 6.
Right, and Cincinnati might be kicking themselves, because I don't know if you've seen their schedule going forward, but they're 5-4 right now, and they go to Iowa State, to Kansas State, and then they face TCU last game of the year. I mean, they're going to be fighting to try to make a bowl game. They kind of let one slip away from them, and Sorsby was a big part of that. But again, I don't want to harp on this too much. Credit to West Virginia for winning that game, but I will say West Virginia is outside the top 100 in turnover margin this year. This is not who they've been all season long, and they found a way to do it in this game. Now we're going to figure out if that's a trend or not. I tend to believe that those trends started earlier in the year, and so we'll see if Baylor can kind of take advantage of those situations and maybe win the turnover margin, which, hasn't been great for Baylor this year either. But I do think that there's going to be some opportunities there for Baylor to maybe create some. We said that last week, they were unable to. Maybe coming off the bye, they're able to create some of the turnover magic that West Virginia was able to create this past weekend.
Yeah, you mentioned the FEI defenses. So to put it in perspective, the Utah game was not a Big 12 game, to keep in mind. Right. So I don't actually have that number in front of me, but Utah's, with all their struggles defensively, they still have been very good.
Played really well this weekend against BYU.
Yeah, and coughed it up late because their offense couldn't do anything. But Colorado currently, FEI defense is 28th, BYU's 19th, Iowa State's 26th, and even throw in Texas Tech still at 35, which is such a weird number to me. Like they're not that high. But that's the first 4 Big 12 defenses they faced. And then you start with Oklahoma State, 113, 86 with TCU, and then West Virginia is 79. So like it's that trend of what's Baylor's offense doing. They figured out a run game, but then it's just the schedule, the back end of the schedule lightened up quite a bit.
Colt, Texas Tech is 94th in SP plus.
Yeah. And it's just defense. The FEI. I love FEI, but that's their numbers are always K4.
Are you sure that's not the offensive number? Because they're 98th defensively.
Offensive now, after the most recent game, Tech's 75th in FEI offense. Their numbers are weird. Like I've felt that way all season. Even going into the game when Baylor played that game, I was like, their defense isn't this good. There's something there that's making those numbers be weird. Yeah. And then because K4 defensively, Tech 90th, offense 48. So it's like that whole outlook on Tech and their overall numbers are weird. Even Tech 54th, that number seems reasonable, but then the other numbers don't add up to that for me. So West Virginia 79th defensively, throwing Houston 42nd, Kansas 63rd. None of those match with, well, Tech 35th. That's still a weird number, but Colorado, BYU, Iowa State, all top 30 defenses. Baylor doesn't face another one of those this year.
Right. And SP plus West Virginia 71st in defense. Yeah. So again, they fit right in line with the common theme that we've seen over the second half of the year. And it's what we talked about. Baylor just had this gauntlet early, and I think it's become more and more clear just how challenging that path was initially. And again, the Utah game was without their starting quarterback, their current starting quarterback, and wasn't following the bye week. It was early in the year. Utah still had a lot of confidence. It's just a different team now.
Yeah, that whole game, you talk about two different starting quarterbacks. Obviously, Cam Rising not being in, Baylor's Sawyer Robertson not starting, Quan Finn still starting in that game. But yeah, so I'm going to look at Utah's FEI now offensively, but I think it was, defensively is still 14th FEI defense. So like that's still arguably the toughest defense they faced all year, even with all of their struggles, which credit to Morgan Scalley, everything they've had issues with on offense, that defense is still what everybody thought it was going to be. And I can only imagine had they had Cam Rising the entire season, how good that defense, because they're just in bad positions all the time. But Baylor's, the back end's is a lot lighter than it was. I think West Virginia is a tough test. I think I don't want to lose that and all of that. I think there's a lot of things, but I think Baylor's, the way that they're improving and surging in key specific areas for this matchup, you feel pretty good about where Baylor is. And right now they're a 2.5-point favorite. That's climbed from the opening of 1.5 just a day ago.
Right. I think that's a telltale sign. And, I think it's just one of those matchups where if these two teams continue to be who they have been all year long, then you got to kind of feel good about Baylor's chances to go in there and not just compete, but come away with a win, honestly. And so we'll see if they're able to do that. I know we're going to talk plenty more about this matchup throughout the week, but I think that there's probably there should be a lot of confidence, I think, on the Baylor side, that Baylor comes in, plays well. There's a lot of things that point to Baylor having success offensively and being able to do enough defensively as well to point to them potentially winning this game. And, that would be 4 wins in a row. And then the streak would just be continuing with 2 more games left, and you'd already be bowl eligible. That would be pretty massive for this program.
Yeah, and I'm really anxious to see the West Virginia crowd, and I'm not the biggest proponent of massive home field crowds, but it can affect in spots and it can snowball on you. But if you can control the crowd with a good running game or just a good offense in general, then it takes the air out of the stadium. If you get up early in the game, like those third downs become a little bit easier. The communication in those instances become a little bit easier. So any final thoughts on this matchup with West Virginia? We're going to talk a lot about this later in the week with our keys to offense and defense and obviously game predictions. But any final thoughts just as a general overview with West Virginia?
I think it's just kind of, what we talked about. I think the biggest keys for Baylor in this game are, stopping explosive plays by West Virginia and then running the football on offense. I think those are the two things that, if Baylor does those two things well, then I think it'll point to a Baylor victory on Saturday.
Yeah. All right, Baylor family. That's going to do it for this episode of Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. Thanks to each of you for listening. And any West Virginia fans listening, make sure to chime in the comment sections. We would love to engage with you as much as we can. And obviously not here to make anyone mad. We just enjoy good football discussion. So everyone have a great Tuesday and sick 'em Bears.